A very warm welcome and good day to all our attendees for this webinar. I am Diya Ranjan, Marketing Manager at Bizmatics. And joining me today as our panelist for this webinar is our billing expert, Samantha Fowler. She is also the Senior Implementation Manager at Bizmatics. And a few housekeeping items before we begin this session. All attendees will be muted for this session. We do have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar, so I request you to please type in your questions in the question section of your dashboard, and we will address them at the end of the webinar. And we will also be conducting a poll during the webinar, so please answer the questions as you see them on your screen. And lastly, a recording of this webinar will be available in our resource center, so you can feel free to access it later on at your convenience. So without further ado, let's welcome Samantha Fowler. A warm welcome and hi to Samantha. It's over to you now.
Thank you, Dia. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're located. We're going to get started on a remittances and AR follow-up today. I do have a quick disclaimer that I'm not legal or professional advice on any specific situation, that this is for informational purposes only. And we're going to start off with a quick poll so that we can see how many attended the advanced billing session at the 2019 User Summit. Go ahead and select your answer on the screen. Okay, the very large majority of you did, so that's good news. Those of you who didn't, that is published on our Prognosis YouTube channel. If you want to go back and watch that, it has some good information in it. And we're going to be spinning off that session. So if you missed that session, some of the things we're going to talk about today might be something you're not aware of, but you can cover it all in that other webinar. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. As you guys may recall, we talked about in the last session how 98% of all billers die from stress. And I did indicate that I was joking, but we all know how stressful the billing can be. And we're going to continue today's session to try and alleviate some of that stress. So one of the things that we talked about in the last session or most of what we talked about in the last session was the built-in features of Prognosis. So we had the automated coding, there were properties, CCI, scrubbers, all these different things, and we talked about a bunch of new features, and we also went over some reporting mechanisms. This information was focused mainly on the stage 3 of the clean claim section for the billing life cycle. Today, we're going to be focusing on stage 4 and 5, the transactions and the AR follow-up. The agenda that we will cover is displayed for you now. I'm not going to read it because you know how to read, but it's just a simple overview of the agenda for today. So now let's jump right into the topics. The first thing I want to ask you is actually another quick poll. When you signed up for this session, what was your goal? And go ahead and answer on your screen. Okay, good. I'm glad to see that number 2 or letter B was actually the biggest section answered. And hopefully you guys were being funny, but 2% of you didn't know what we said. So hopefully you'll be listening from this point forward. Okay, so that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to do some tips and tricks, and I'm going to help you learn how to manage your AR better. So the screen that you see now is kind of a staged planning that will allow you to do continuous improvement efforts. So when you start your practice, you probably plan your strategy without knowing your trends yet because you're a brand new practice. But once you know your trends, you should be going back to plan your strategy, and you should adapt and improve your strategy every time you know a new trend. So this should be an ongoing, continuous effort that you watch your trends and you plan your strategy. You watch your trends and you plan your strategy. And throughout that entire time, you're going to be averting the uncollectible. So knowing your trends and planning your strategy will be another webinar another time. But today we're going to focus on averting the uncollectible. Because if we take the time to avert the uncollectible, then your AR becomes more manageable. So the first 3 items I have on that list are verify, authorize, and communicate. So if you don't have integrated eligibility, that is something that you can get through one of the clearinghouses. And this screen that you have up now kind of demonstrates how you can verify the insurance. And then depending on the type of insurance, if it's a HMO or PPO or something like that, you might go further to find out if you need to authorize that service. And then finally, you're going to communicate that information to your patient. And we all know that the patient has the contract with the insurance company and that they should know what their coverage is, but it affects your bottom line for them not to know. So communicating to the patient what they're expected to pay up front is very important. So the next step is actually collecting the patient amounts. And I've listed a few statistics that you probably already know, but deductibles are getting higher and higher. It's around $2,000 or more right now, and the average out-of-pocket is around $4,500. And that leaves your healthcare bill being about 30% of the patient's responsibility. So when your bottom line is expecting 30% from your patient, collecting up front is going to be your best business practice. That doesn't mean that you're going to not have policies for charity care or financial burdens or whatever, but for the majority, collecting up front is going to be your best business. The next piece is providing the services, documenting it, and then processing your claims. That's kind of what we talked about in the last session, where you're using your CCI edits that can help you identify bundled stuff. You can use scrubbers that are available on the EMR and the billing side, and you can have your local coverage determinations loaded into your system. So all of these things will help you provide your service, document your service, get the right coding, create that claim, and then you're going to bill your claim. And all of that's going to be done in a timely fashion. So the next part of this is actually one of our main focuses today, and that is collecting the insurance amounts. So everything we've talked about so far is intricately involved in this process, and everything that you do up to this point affects it. So if you don't do one of the first steps right, you're automatically going to make managing your AR more difficult. So we're going to jump into some remittances. Once you're collecting your payments, you hope to get a normal EOB. That's case 1. What's a normal EOB, you might ask? We're going to go over some of the things that happen. And oops, sorry, there we go. We're going to go over some of the things that happen with a normal EOB. So I'm going to jump up here to my remittance tab and go to my EOB ERAs. And the first thing we're going to look at is EOB number 15. Let's do number 15 here. So we're going to talk about payer sequence and coordination of benefits. So the reason I have listed this particular EOB for this scenario is because notice at the top that the payer says Aetna, but the payer that's in bold is Blue Cross. That is your first indicator that you potentially have a invalid sequence for that claim. So when we expand this item, your sequence drop down is going to let you change it. So either you need to determine that somehow you put the wrong name up here and this is the right payer, or this really should be a secondary payment. This happens when the secondary comes in before the primary. So if you just switch that to secondary, go ahead and enter that information. You can still have it posted, and then when the primary comes in, you can address it and resequence it correctly at that point, or recalculate it correctly at that point. So that is tip number 1. Always watch your payers and your payer name and make sure the one that's highlighted is the right one. And it wouldn't take long just to glance through a big EOB just to make sure every one of the payers is highlighted correctly. So the second item is going to be in EOB 16 or ERA 16. Yep, it is an EOB. And here we're going to talk about the coordination of benefits. So in this case, we have a Aetna and we have a Medicare. And this is on the secondary drop down, and it has 2 little R's next to it, and it's under the secondary. So you immediately know that first you've got a primary payment because you have the R's over here, or you have some type of payment. You can click on those to confirm exactly what the payment is. Because sometimes it may be a non-payment transaction, and you want to make sure that it is paid. And then you'll be able to see that the secondary payer is highlighted and nothing is lit up in red or anything like that. So this is a good coordination of benefits. This is the way it should look. Okay, so now let's jump over here to ELE number 4. And this is an older database, so it had the original prefix of ELE for electronic remits. The newer databases have ERA as your electronic remits. So just to point out for some of you that may not know, EOB means that it was a paper remit. ELE or ERA should mean that it is a electronic remit. Okay, so we have a few on this one, and we're going to talk about the allowables and what to do when you disagree with them. So when we click on one of the patients to expand it, if you have loaded your contract amounts as a fee schedule under settings fee schedule, there's a way to load either a billing schedule or an allowable schedule. And if you don't know your allowables, I recommend to at least load your Medicare allowable so you at least have something to go by. So what happens is it puts your contract amount right here, what that allowable fee schedule says you should have collected. And that way, when you see your allowable here, you can see that it's way lower than the contract amount. So immediately when you're posting your payments, you can see that you have underpays. And over here under your ellipsis, don't accept an approved payment as at face value. You want to research it and make sure that it's truly what it should be. It could have been processed out of network or anything, and you're just accepting it as is. So if you check it out and you decide that it's not something that's correct, you can click on your little action button, your ellipsis here, and you can mark that claim as disputed. You can either mark it as contract allowed disputed, or you can just retain the responsibility, because if they applied the whole thing to the deductible, for example, you're not going to have an amount to dispute. You're just going to be retaining it in that primary responsibility so that you can research it, make sure you understand that it truly should have been processed out of network, and then you can release it to the patient once you make sure it's processed correctly. So here you can say underpay or whatever reason you want, but you do have to put a reason, and then you would say okay. So now you notice you have the little disputed button right next to that, and that will put this in a queue under AR follow-up disputed so that you can work it later on. Okay, so let's go ahead and minimize that. And I believe this one. Okay, so this one is a denial. This is a normal EOB. You're going to get denial sometimes in your normal EOB, and that's okay, because sometimes it's, you know, the coverage is expired or whatever, and there's legitimate reasons for a payment to be denied. So when the payment is denied, you can leave it as is. You can leave it in your bucket, and it will, when you post this remittance, it will automatically go under AR follow-up denied, and that will be your bucket for all your denied stuff. If you wear both hats, payment posting and denials, and you like to work them as you go, you do have your action button for denied, where you can choose the denial method, the action method that you want to take on that denial. One thing I want to point out to you that's new is we now have copy action to other denied rows. So if you have a denial for duplicate claim, for example, there is nothing you need to do. You just need to mark it resolved, and you want to apply it to every line in that claim because it's a duplicate and you've already got payment or whatever the case may be. It's a resolved claim that you don't need to take action on. So just know that now we have this copy action to other rows. So if you have 5 different rows on there and it's all the same reason, you can mark it as copy to other rows, and that will make this process faster for you. Okay, so now let's jump up here to ELE 05. Okay, so in this, we are going to talk about the sequestration amounts a little bit here. So a little bit later in our slides, we're going to talk about the different ways that you can handle sequestration, but right now we're going to talk about the system default. So when there is an amount under non-covered and it's a Medicare claim, this probably means that it's sequestration. And how you can verify that is under your remarks. You can see your different reason codes at the top, and you can see the adjustment description beneath it. So you can see that 253 is a $1.11 penalty. 144 is a 94-cent. Oops, and I just rearranged that. And then 94 cents is the penalty. So if we come back down here, 17 cents is the difference between that. So here you can either write it off immediately using your write-off button, or you can handle it a different way that we'll talk about later. But I want to point out one thing about this particular claim. If I try and do a write-off, I'm going to get a pop-up that says this is going to the secondary. So if you have Medicare sequestration amounts and you have a secondary amount, a secondary payer, you're not going to be able to write them off. But if you come down here to the Medicare one, you can write this one off if you want. So you would be able to select the amount as, and I should have had sequestration in this list, but you can customize this list and select your reason. We'll just say appeal denied, or let's do auto write-off actually. But normally I have listed in here sequestration amount. So when you have a sequestration amount that you write off, you can choose that item and then write it off. And click OK. And then when you expand that, you'll see that the amount is in red. But you can't write it off when there's another insurance in place, and that's because that information is on that coordination of benefits information, and that secondary payer may do something different with that amount. So that's the first thing, is that if there's a secondary payer in place, you can't write it off. So now let's jump over here to our claim, or ERA 26. So ERA 26 is a special scenario where the original insurance paid, and then the patient had a health savings account that they are going to apply to this. So in your drop down, this is actually a posted one, but in your drop down, if there's a patient responsibility, you're going to find HSA in that list, and you can choose that so that you can post an amount that is related to a health savings account. A lot of people try and post them under patient payment or something like that, but because if it's a HSA that comes directly from the payer and it's a payer check, then this is the proper way to handle that by doing the drop down for HSA. If you get an HSA for a claim that does not have a patient balance, it will not be in the drop down, and you need to research if that was a valid payment or not and handle it accordingly as either a duplicate payment or excess payment or whatever the case may be. Okay, so the next thing on our list is the, let's jump back over here to our slides. Is recoups. So we have a screen here that you can see that talks about the process for recoup claims. in your EOB screen, and actually, you'll get these handouts so you can actually look at this closer at your own time. But right now, we're going to jump actually back over to here, and we're going to go into remit number 7. So remit number 7 has a recoup in it. And you can identify it really fast because it's all the lettering is in red on that claim line. So this example is one where it's a good recoup actually, because notice that they recouped $73.99, but they repaid $96.89. So when you see a recoup, the first lesson is it's not always a bad thing. Sometimes it's a good thing because they realize they've underpaid you on their own and they've come back and given you more money. We hope all of them are like that, but we know that's not always the case. So now let's jump over here and let's look at EOB number 9. So in EOB number 9, we have a recoup, and you can see that we have a recoup of $100 here. That is the full amount of this claim. And that's the way we recommend that you do that. Even if it's a partial one, I'm going to show you how you would apply a recoup when it's not the full balance. So let's go ahead and we're going to pull in, actually, sorry, we're going to use our recoup binoculars here, and we're going to pull in a claim to do a partial recoup on. So the first step here is I'm going to find that claim ID that's listed on my EOB. I'm going to grab it, and it's going to display all the lines for that EOB, and I'm going to be able to select the ones that I want to choose. Go ahead and select them all, and go ahead and leave your recoup amount as paid in, recouped in full. Don't change this paid amount, and then say OK. So now you have your line item for the paid amount of $210, and you can see up here we now have some additional remaining money because this money was pulled out of that original claim and made available either to apply to another claim or to refund back to the payer depending on that payer's process. So what we're going to do next is we're going to pull in that same claim or whatever claim the money should be applied to, but this example is when they're applying it back to the same one. And if this were a partial payment, you can then come in here and enter the amount that they actually decided to pay. So the original amount, you can see by going back up to the recoup one, was $100 and $110. But if we come down here and they really only paid $50, you can enter your payment of what they actually did pay and then minimize that. So you can see here they took back $210 and they actually repaid or approved only $60. So this is a bad recoup. This is one where they took more money and didn't give you that much back. So we're going to post the first line for the recoup, and then we'll come and we'll post the second line. Oops, and hold on just a second. I should not have done that. Hold on, let me get rid of that one. I did that out of order. I should have actually. You will pull in your recoup and enter your amounts, and then you'll pull in, after you post that claim, you'll pull in your next claim. Okay, so now let's say they paid $50, and then they paid $10 on that one, and now you'll be able to post the second one after the first one is posted. So that's the key there, is to make sure that, cannot post non-zero, let's see here. I am not doing this correctly because I didn't even do my adjustments. So you guys see how easy this can be if you're not paying attention. You actually have to enter all of the information about that remit. So let's say they adjusted 120 and then they paid 50 and then $30 was the patient's copay. So let me explain what I did there. I was trying to just enter the paid amount without entering all my other items, and it was leaving a balance over here on the right-hand side. So as you know, if you're in this advanced session, you've been doing this a while, and your goal is to make sure that that balance is zero. So if you ever get that error that just popped up, that means that you've forgotten to enter something somewhere, because all of this should be balanced out to 0 when you're done. So now we can say that this was $65 adjustment and then the payment of $10. So now this is going to let me post this, even though this bottom one has 120 left on it, because we left it alone and we didn't include this in the recoup item, it's going to leave it, it's going to drop it off the claim. So now let's minimize and let's post. And now the item will post. So let's expand that. And you can see that the last line disappeared because it was left blank, therefore meaning it wasn't a part of that remittance. But it pulls in every line when you're doing a manual claim because it's doesn't know what's on the claim when it's a manual one. When it's electronic, it'll pull in only the line items that apply to that particular remit information. Okay, so that is a recoup when you have it applied back to a partial recoup. So you recoup all of it, then you reapply it in that same session. Okay, so we're going to go back over here to claim number 9, or ELE number 9. And we're going to talk about non-prognosis amounts now. So when you have a non-prognosis amount, that means that you have money that doesn't relate to something in your system, meaning it's not related to a claim. So you could have payments that belong in your old system. You could have recoups that came out of your old system, but you could also have other types of payments, such as a increase because of an incentive plan or different things like that. So depending on how you get that incentive, if it's not attached to a claim, then the most proper way to handle that is to go to your allocated amount and use your non-prognosis area here to enter either the payment or the recoup. And then that will still show on your reportings for collections, but it will show that it wasn't associated to any specific claim. Okay, so we're going to jump back over here to, let's reset that. We're going to jump back over here to ELE number 5. I think we looked at that a little bit earlier. And here we're going to see that under our remaining amount, there's nothing in the prognosis area. But let's say that this line here has a payment, but the money isn't showing in your check amount. It's because the payer applied it from an old recoup. So what happens is you come under your allocated amount, you enter in the recoup amount of $83.40, and then that will increase your remaining amount once you expand that to $83.40. And then you'll have that money to apply to your claim. And now it's 0 because you have a check amount of one thing, but you have an allocated amount of another. So to balance that out, you can use your allocated amount to make sure that you recoup or add payments accordingly from where it came from. Okay, so let's jump back over to sequestration amounts. We're going to come up here and we're going to go back and look at I'm going to reset this again. This requires batch numbers. So that's where that error is coming from. So we're going to jump up here to our little binoculars and we are going to go back to ELE number 8. And this is the one where the new process is being applied for sequestration. You can see that there's nothing under the non-covered amount, where in the prior example, there was 17 cents left in that one claim that we looked at. So what's happening here is if we come over here to our remarks, you can see that there is a sequestration amount of 31-cent penalty, and then there's an incentive amount of a 21-cent extra amount, an incentive. And then when you look, actually, let's go back over here. And when you look at the adjusted amount, it says 7677 should be your contractual adjustment. But if you look over here, the adjustment is 7687, which includes that 10 cents that was remaining from the incentive and the reduction. So what we've done here is we've set up the system to automatically apply that adjustment into your adjustment category as a contractual obligation. We're going to jump over to one more one more slide on our presentation before we move forward in the system, because I want you to look at a couple of things with me. And so the first default way that we talked about was leaving the amount as non-covered and doing a manual adjustment. The second way we talked about was automatically including it in your contract adjust amount. But questions that have been posed to me in the past are, do you really think that you can auto adjust that in the adjustment field? Because then it's not going to match that secondary EOB information. Well, in fact, it is going to match it. You might have certain situations that might not, but the majority of your payers will say they only accept certain adjustment groups when it comes to the EOB, that secondary coordination of benefits EOB. They're going to either want to know that it was patient responsibility or it was a contractual obligation. That's what the secondary is worried about, because they're going to pay based on that. So you can see here, this is an example from Aetna, and I have the link down here at the bottom so you can find it again if you want. But Aetna says if you have an adjustment code that's in this category, and notice 144, 223, and 253 are in that category, that you should use Contractual Obligation 45 to send that secondary claim. So it doesn't matter that it was a reason code of one of these three when it came from the original primary payer. They just want to know that it's a contractual obligation. So most of your Medicare claims are auto crossover claims, so you don't even have to file them in the system. And hopefully you know about the Insurance Master, where you can check mark the auto crossover, and that way it doesn't create a secondary claim for you. But if you do have to manually process it for whatever reason, we're going to be sending that information as a CO45. And we're also going to be sending the information for the patient responsibility as a PR96, because they don't really care where that money is being arrived from. They just want to know contractual obligation or patient responsibility. So let's go ahead and jump back over to our next slide. And so if you want to do the auto adjust, the steps are super simple. All you have to do is go to Settings and Configuration and go to your group types, and then make sure that your remit class and your special number values are set. So let's go do that together. So you're going to go to Settings, Configuration, and you may have privileges that you need to have set in order to access this. So if you can't see this information, it's because you don't have access to it. So you're going to come over here to Group Types, and you're going to go to BA, Payment Denied Reasons. And what I normally recommend here is using Control F for Find, because then you can search for a keyword and find it really fast. I recommend this on a lot of different screens. So now we're going to jump into BA, and you're going to look up the reason codes that you want to make this change to. So 253 is one of them. So you would come to 253, and then you would make sure that your remit class is 0 and your special number value is 5. This says make this a contractual obligation rather than a non-covered amount. So number 5 says change this to a contractual obligation. So once you do that for each of your codes, the next remit that comes in is going to automatically process it as part of your adjustment amount. For the EOBs that are existing, it's going to be exactly how it was before that change was made, and you'll have to manually do any of the EOBs already created. but after that, it will automatically set up for the other adjustment. So now let's go on to our next slide. If you want to continue doing manual write-offs, meaning take each individual painstaking line and write it off individually, that's up to you. That might be what you need to do because you have some special scenario that you want to do it that way for. And because of that, we've created some reports. This is the report code, but it's basically posting remits for sequestration amounts. And then we have a second report that is sequestration or other federal and state adjustments. So if we come back over here to Prognosis and we go to reports and tabular, the first thing you want to do is make sure that it's set to all reports, because if you have a lot of favorites saved, it may say my reports. So make sure all reports is checkmarked. And then under your binoculars here, if you just search for SEQ even, it's going to pull up both of those reports. Plus you have the code over here. And when you pull up that report, you'll be able to give a time frame that you want to run it for. Then you click go. And this is going to give you a report of the amounts that were sequestration and incentive. And then the other one is sequestration and other federal reductions. So depending on how you qualify for your programs, one or the other, or maybe you have to run it for both for different providers or whatever. But then you have the second one that will be the other federal reduction 223 code. So that's how you can handle it if you want to continue the manual process. But keep in mind that automation process is going to be much easier for you. Okay, so let's jump back over here to our slides. So the last thing we're going to talk about, actually second to last thing that we're going to talk about for remittances is posting a primary and a secondary in the same claim. There's a question I'm going to cover a little bit later on about posting when there's a primary payment for both payers are paying a primary payment, but this is a remit that has a primary and a secondary in the same remit, and they are paying in the primary position, and then the secondary is paying in the secondary position. Let's say they have dual coverage for United Healthcare or Blue Cross or something like that. That would be an example where they potentially would send both primary and secondary payments in the same remittance. So again, you're going to get these slides and I have it detailed here, but let's jump over to Prognosis and we will do this together. So we're going to jump up here to Remittance, EOB again. And we are going to look for remit number 10. So in this remit, we have this claim right here, number 470, where they paid primary. This is your primary remit. And ignore these payers. This should be Aetna and Aetna in the same remit, but I'm just using this as an example for this. And we have $80.69 left over in this remit that belongs on the secondary. But the system isn't going to let you post the primary and the secondary in the same remit. So what's going to happen is you're going to come up here and leave this money here and let it flow over into the advance portion of that payer. One of the problems we have, though, is we have so many different payers here that when we click on our remaining amount to assign where that money should go, a lot of times you're left having to pick what payer it will go to. In this case, it's grabbing the same thing that's in the first remittance, but this may not be where you want to hold your advance money. So one of the things that I teach is under your little binoculars here, you can set up some special holding payers that are used just for recoupes and refunds. So let me show you what I mean. If I type in the word recoup, you can see I have two examples in this database. Aetna, recoupes and refunds only. This you would communicate to your front desk that you would never use this to assign it to a patient's insurance level, because this is solely for processing recoups and refunds. That way you don't have to worry about what payer has this amount, because Aetna has one paying entity that might go across 15 different plans, and it can get confusing that way. So if you set up a recoups refund only bucket for those, you can grab that every time you have a recoup or every time you have a refund, and know that the money for Aetna is here, and know the money for Blue Cross is in the one you make for Blue Cross, so on and so forth. So you grab that recoup plan, and then you select OK. And when we save this or post this remit, we're going to come down here, ready to post, and save. And we're going to get this pop-up that says, do you want to move this money to advance? And you're going to say yes. So now we have the primary EOB posted. We have the secondary amount moved to advance, and you can tell that by the header of the allocated amount, the remaining amount title now. So the first thing you might want to do is just copy the check number. And then you're going to remember your check and remit date so that you can make a match on the secondary remit. And then you're also going to keep in mind which claim had that secondary payment on it. So I'm going to click Add New. I'm going to come down here and add my claim. I'm going to paste in my check number. And then I'm going to make sure that I do my correct dates so that it matches back. And I think this was 12/10. This is just an example, so I don't care if it really matches back, but you're going to want to make sure that you get those dates correct. And now you'll be able to grab the money for this secondary payment. So what it was is $16.86 for this one, and you can see it right here on the left-hand side, but you should also have your remit in front of you. And then you have $63.83. So now I have $80.69 posted on this claim. I have $80.69 waiting on remaining amount. So what you have to do, and let me get my batch number here. So what you have to do is come up here to your remaining amount, grab where you know that insurance is, and notice how this is grayed out. This is grayed out because I pulled my claim in a minute ago and it auto-populated it based on that payer. So when that happens, what you want to do is come up here and change this title, because the title, it makes it easy if you want to be able to attach it to a specific claim or a specific insurance. But if you don't, you just change that name, tab out of it, and save. And this will be a generic free text field so that when you go back in your remaining amount, now it's opened up for you to choose whoever you want. So most groups need this to be a free text because you have so many plans that belong under the same payer type. So here we'll be able to go under our binoculars, search for our keyword recoup, because we've set up these special insurances for the processing recoups only. We grab the one that we know applies to this one. And now when we go to post this, the money's going to automatically pull out of that bucket. So now I save. It's going to say, do you want to use this advance amount? And you say yes. And now it tells you that the amount came from advance. And that is how you properly post a primary and secondary payment in the same remit. You do have to split it out, but then you have your original check number attached here, and then it shows you that the amount came from advance, and you can match those two back to each other because they were associated by that check number. Okay, so let's jump back over here to our slides. So that was the last scenario that I had planned for today, because we do have a lot to cover in the session. But if you have special scenarios that you do want me to go over, if we have time at the end of the session, remember that you can enter your questions in the question queue of the GoToWebinar dashboard. So you can enter those there. And I do already have a few questions from where people have emailed the questions over. So if you send it via email, we do already have that ready to go. So let's jump on into the next category, and that is the AR follow-up. So AR follow-up, how many of you think it's a waiting game? We're going to move on to our next poll so that you can tell us, do you think that working your AR is a waiting game? And go ahead and answer on your screen. Okay, good. The majority said no. That is very, very good news because I don't have to yell at you quite as much if you think that AR is not a waiting game. So you'll see up here on the next slide that I have showing that I agree. The working your AR is not a waiting game, at least not for very long. So one of the things that we forget is that we have time frames. So after we've done all these other steps that we talked about to avert the uncollectible, and after we've collected those insurance payments, we need to work remnant AR timely. And I use the word remnant on purpose because if you followed all these other steps by verifying the insurance, getting an authorization number, linking that authorization to the appointments, communicating to the patient what you expect them to pay up front, documenting that service, processing the claims, then collecting the insurance amounts, then you're going to have only remnants of money that you have to work. We definitely still have some payers who try to avoid paying you, and that is part of the remnant, but hopefully it's based on their decisions and not in office workflow issues. So to start with the AR follow-up, we're going to talk about the 4 categories of AR follow-up. First, you have the category of missing or ignored claims. Then you have the approved claims that you've disputed. You have your denied claims, and then you have your recouped claims. And I put recouped in red because this doesn't really have a process for following up the way the other ones do. It's just determined by what claims have a recoup in them. So that is a little bit different from the other ones that we're going to go over today. So let's go ahead and get started on the first section, which is missed and ignored claims. So we're going to go into Prognosis and we're going to do a little bit of sorting and filtering and do some things to help you find and identify these claims that are missed and ignored. So for AR follow-up, we're going to be working in the second tab here. AR follow-up is an ongoing process from the very beginning at the front desk all the way through the last end of the claim getting collected. So we have patient account and patient pay plans bulked into this, but we're going to be focusing on assigned tasks to denied for today's session. And we're going to start off in outstanding. So outstanding, remember, is the bucket that has all of your claims that are at least 1 cent up to the full balance still waiting to be collected. If your claim has been paid and or adjusted in full, it doesn't show up in this category. So the first thing you want to do is utilize your filter button because this is a small database. It's just for demos, so it doesn't have a lot of stuff in it, but you can have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of claims sitting in this bucket. Hopefully you don't have that many unless you're a really huge practice that process a lot every month. But this is a smaller database, so it's manageable. If you have a large group, you're going to want to use your little filter button up here. So under this filter button, the few things that I can give you as tips for missed and outstanding or ignored claims is first set your responsibility of primary, secondary, tertiary. Because the one thing you're not worried about when you're looking at missed or outstanding claims is the patient balance at this point. Right now we're focused on insurance. The second thing is your payment status is no payment. And then you want to make sure that you leave it at its default sort. So when we apply this, essentially what's happening is it's showing you every claim that hasn't gotten any payments, and it's going to automatically be sorted by your send date. You can resort it a different way, but that means it's the oldest claim, the most days out from the last claim, the last time that you sent that claim. So this one happens to be back to 2012. We know that hopefully isn't logical for your practice, that you don't have send dates that old and you still have balances. But if you do, there's some AR cleanup that we're going to talk about a little later on that you're going to need to do. So when you look at this, let's pretend this says 2019. So when you look at this and you say, oh, I have a charge amount of $125, I have a balance amount of $125, and I don't have any denials, I don't have any last EOBs, I don't have it assigned to anybody, this basically has been untouched and it's still not paid. So this is something that you're going to want to work. You're going to come up here and you're going to use all your different action buttons up here. You can call your or go on your insurance claims site, because the first thing you want to do is see if the claim actually made it into the system, because maybe you had the wrong EDI code on it and it's sitting in La La Land. And another thing is this track status. So down here at the bottom you have a legend. So we know immediately this number 11 is still sitting in the send to EDI mode. So that means you didn't even get a 277 or 999 report, which is the return rejected statuses from your payer and your clearinghouse. So your goal when you send a claim is to immediately get it to a 76, which is accepted. So if you don't have a 76 in this track status or an acceptable tracking, it can be other than 76, but that's probably the most common, then you immediately know that something's gone wrong, that it hasn't even made it far enough to get another report back from the carrier. So you're going to want to verify the information under your patient insurance. Make sure you didn't enter anything wrong there, so on and so forth. But I purposely bring you in here because you can go straight to your insurance company hyperlink and double check the stuff here as well. If you don't see that hyperlink, that is a privilege-based role, and you can get it if you are deemed to be the person that should have it in your office. But that's a quick way to get to that insurance master to check that information. So you're going to go through these and do whatever's appropriate for that particular payer. Now, keep in mind that the typical time limit is 365 days. So if you come in this bucket and your send date or your date of service is greater than 365 days, that is pretty well an automatic write-off. And you should be over here under remittance write-off. Bulk insurance write-off might be the first step you need to take, because you need to get rid of all that old AR and mark it as lost revenue for timely filing. So after today, when you do this bulk insurance write-off, for those of you who have a lot of these, from this point forward, you're not going to have to come here anymore, because you're going to follow the process that gets this done timely so that you avoid having to do a bulk write-off for that reason. So that's the first thing. If you have a lot of old claims, just go ahead. If you're a billing service, get permission from your client, bite the bullet and accept the fact that you've lost that revenue for the majority of that. Some of it might be not your fault. You can appeal it with a timely filing, letter or whatever, and we can talk about that. But if you've just got behind on your AR and you know you've neglected it, it's time to clean it up. So 365 days is the normal time limit, but we also have ones that have a short time limit. So with a short time limit, you might want to create an even deeper filter that pulls up those payers. So for example, Aetna is one that has 180 days. So you might want to have a special filter where you have Aetna added and apply it just for that payer so that you can look at it closer. And keep in mind, when you're under your filter button, whatever you have set up, if you love this, you can come down here and say save filter, and then you can say Aetna no pays or whatever you want to call it. And then you'll have it in your drop down list for working it. You also can set up a lot of different stuff here. So if I switch this to one of these, it says primary, secondary, tertiary, and then down here at the bottom, it has 91 to 120 days for that. So if I apply it, now I have my, and that was a bad one in this database. Let me do one of the different ones. Let's do 31 to 60. So you can look and you can see what's that is that old. So your goal is to use this filter to create buckets of things that you need to follow up on. And if you come over under your filter and come up to the little question mark, this will define what all the different fields mean so that you can properly find what you need, and also use your Control F key in order to search for a particular title or something. So now let's jump over here to our slides. So the next category is approved denials. This is going to be exactly the same process, except for when you're under your AR follow-up, you're going to go to disputed. And you're going to work your items from here, where you might need to write them off, or mark them not disputed because you decided that it was correct. Under your little notes button, you can reset it if you determine that it's not possible, that it's not really paid incorrectly. Or you can use your little claim icon, and this will let you create your appeal letter. And these templates are under settings, configuration, billing, where I can come in here and I have one that I created, underpaid, out of network ER. For this is an emergency situation. That's the reason they came and saw us out of network, and it should be reprocessed under in-network benefits. So then you can attach your EMR records, your billing records, and when you save this and send it, it will put a copy of it under the patient account so that you can use it for future reference. So under AR follow-up denied is the other bucket that we talked about. In the AR follow-up denied, you want to confirm the details of that denial, category and reason is the best way, and determine, let's say this one is a medical record request. You just need to send out what they requested. This is an auth and referral. You need to get your referral. This is insurance. This probably means that the payers expired or something like that. But you can work from this screen, but I do want to make sure that all of you know that when you have a claim that has multiple lines, like claim 449, if I click on 449 and get inside that claim detail, I like to work from here for two reasons. Number one, I can see all of the claim information and all the codes and everything that were used, but you have this little action button up here for denied. So one error I see a lot is people trying to click reopen down here. This is a big no-no. Do not use reopen, especially if you have a denied action button lit up. This will not be lit up if there's not a denial. So if you click on that, you can come in here and you can take action on multiple things. So I don't need to take action on my medical record yet because that I'm going to do with the claim letter or whatever. But maybe the rest of them, I want to write them off because we can't get authorization. It's too late. So you'll be able to leave all the rest of them check marked and then just click process for that particular item. And again, all your reasons are customizable under settings, configuration, and group types. So the last part of this session is the recouped claims. Keep in mind that recoups are somewhat out of your control. They may be recouping something because the patient's benefits expired, but they didn't get the notice it was expired until, or not expired, but terminated. And so you don't have a lot of choice on that. So this, you just have to work them as quickly as possible and make sure you know your appeals process and your state laws. And then finally, you want to make sure that your 30 to 60 day bracket is your majority and that you have less than 15% that's older than 90 days. And I've actually used up a lot of the time doing the session itself. So we are down to 1 minute over. So we have one last poll that I want you to take, and then we will open up the panel for questions. And for those of you that are able to stay on, we'll do questions for about 10 minutes. So go ahead and answer the number, or letter A is the answer, everybody. Make sure you answer letter A. Okay, and let's go ahead and display those results, and then we'll jump into the Q&A session. Okay, good. It's mostly pleased. So if you want to send an email to me and tell me what was missed or what you want different, then we will be sure and get that information in one of our next webinars. So the last thing I want to talk about is if you decide that outsourcing is right for you, because sometimes the overload of what's going on is too much, or you lose staff, or whatever the case may be, keep in mind that we do have medical billing services for practice management, revenue cycle, account resolution, and credentialing. So now we're going to open up to questions. So the first question I have is Medicare and Cigna both are paying as a primary payer. The person who emailed this to me, I'm going to answer this direct to you because it is probably a special scenario, because most of the time they should be paying as primary and secondary, and you're going to either need to determine who paid incorrectly and mark it as disputed and work it accordingly, or if they truly both paid as primary, you're probably going to want to post one of them as excess or something like that. But if you want to reach out to me directly so that I can know the scenario better, I can give you more details. And then the second question was about transfer balances from one patient to another. So real quick, if you go under Remittance, transfer patient balance is where you can do that. And it's super easy. You just pick the patient where the payment was posted by first clicking on Add New at the bottom. You select the patient that it was posted to, and then you select the patient that you want to transfer it to. And then you click Save, and the money's moved. So that's a pretty easy process. Okay, Dia, do you have any questions in the panel?
Yes, Samantha, I do have a lot of questions. I think maybe we can take two more from the panel. And then what I wanted to tell our attendees is that we have collected all the questions that came through during the webinar. So what we will do is we will address this collectively via an email so that everybody gets to see the question and answer. I think that would be the best way to go about it. So let me just read out two questions and you can answer those, Samantha.
Okay.
So the one question that came to us was, when posting Medicare remits, I have to fix allowed amount is incorrect, so there is a negative payment in the not allowed column. Can this be corrected?
Yes, that's actually one of the things that you can handle with the remittance group codes that we talked about, where you can change the remittance type to 5, because as long as it's coming across on your electronic, and I need to clarify if it's electronic or paper, because that will determine how you need to handle that. But for electronic ones, it can be handled with changing that reason code to a 5, so that it will automatically adjust that accordingly. But if you want to email me separately, I can help you get that set up.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. The next question is, our practice no longer takes Medicaid. Is there a way that it can be taken out of the system? The claims are auto billing to Medicaid as the patient's secondary insurance.
You would want to inactivate it at the patient level, or if you want to be able to show that they have Medicaid as secondary and you're just not going to file it, you can go to the insurance master and inactivate that Medicaid item, but you will not be able to associate it to a claim. And as long as you don't associate it to a claim, it should not be billing it inside of Prognosis. But if you have a primary that auto crosses over to secondary, there's not anything that you can do about that, because, and I can't promise, but I think the regulations are that if you accept a primary and they happen to have Medicaid as secondary, then it's going to be processed and you'll be accepting whatever they send for that.
All right. So, so this is another question. How to apply advance payment to a balance when the advance payment is under a different attending provider?
So you must have some properties set that keep your money associated with a specific provider. So under settings configuration properties, there's a section about the advance. If you use the keyword advance, you will be able to find it that will let you say that you can cross money across different payers and different business units and different locations and things like that. But that must be set to restrict that so that you can't use money from one provider to another. And that's usually for distribution reasons. If you get paid on productivity or whatever, you need to keep that money associated and only use it for that provider. So again, you can email me and I can help you get that corrected if you should be using money across providers.
All right, let's take this last question. So this question is, if we have been considering outsourcing our billing but are afraid of the transition, and we were to choose your revenue cycle management services, can you tell us how long the transition takes and tips to make it smoother?
Okay, sure. The transition is nothing to be afraid of as long as you plan ahead. So the first thing is what clearinghouse you're using and if you're going to be switching, because if you use our services, we typically use TriZetto or Cognizant, Gateway EDI. They have a lot of different names that might be known to you. So if you're using that clearinghouse already, it's going to be a super easy transition and not as much going on. But if you need to move from one clearinghouse to another, you need to plan probably 30 days at the minimum to make sure that everything happens smoothly and that you can get all of your things copied over and approved and all of that. But if you decide to switch, the RCM team will work with you closely to say, okay, let's make your switch go live date, February 15th or whatever. And they'll work with you to make it work for your group and to make sure you have everything in place so you don't have a gap in revenue.
All right. So let's kind of wind up the session. Thank you so much, Samantha, for all the knowledge and information you shared for the audience. I'm sure it will be beneficial to everybody who was here. And as I mentioned earlier, the recording will be available in our resource center, so people can access it as per their convenience. And a big thank you to all our attendees for your participation. If you have any questions or concerns, you can reach out to Samantha at the email displayed on your screen, or you can reach out to me at dranjan@bismaticsinc.com. Thank you once again.
Thank you, everybody.